Hello and welcome to our AIB webinar featuring the latest research from the Academy's two journals, Journal of International Business Studies and Journal of International Business Policy. My name is Minbaeva. I'm a professor at King's College London, and I'll be your host today. Our webinars aim at providing a forum for sharing most recent research published and forthcoming in JIBS and JIBS and discussing its implications. I'd like to thank the co-organizers for this series of webinars, Klaus Meyer from the Ivy Business School, as well as Stephanie Wang from the Keio School of Business, Indiana Universities. I'd also like to thank the logistics support from the AIB Secretariat and technical support from Digital Motion. Thank you for joining. You can actively participate in the discussions by posting your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, and that is at the bottom of your screen. You should see a button that says Q&A. You can write your questions there. You would also be able to like questions, which will make them to move up on the list and hence bring them to our attention. I'll pick up questions from Q&A and ask the panelists. So please do use this opportunity to engage. And there is also chat that we will be monitoring, but please use Q&A for questions and chat for all other reasons. Today, our webinar is dedicated to the 2023 JIBS Decade Award paper by Anthony Goerzen, Christian Geisler Asmussen, and Bo Bernard Nielsen, entitled Global Cities and Multinational Enterprise Location Strategy. The award-winning paper, retrospective, and commentaries are published in the latest version of Journal of International Business Study. And now I would like to invite the JIBS Editor-in-Chief, Professor Rosalie Tung, to welcome our panelists.
Well, thank you, Dana. Welcome to the webinar. The 2023 JIBS Decade Award is sponsored by Palgrave Macmillan and is designed to recognize the most influential paper published in the Journal of International Business Studies 10 years prior and was presented at the annual AIB conference. In order to be considered for the JIBS Decade Award, an article must be one of the 5 most cited articles published in JIBS for the year being considered. The 2023 selection committee members were Katz Asakawa from Keio University, Jeremy Clegg, University of Leeds, Catherine Welch, Trinity College Dublin, and myself in my capacity as JIBS Editor-in-Chief. The JIBS Decade Award was made to Anthony Goerzen, Queen's, Christian Asmussen, Copenhagen Business School, and Bo Nielsen, University of Sydney. And as Dana mentioned, the title for their award-winning paper is Global Cities and Multinational Enterprise Locations Strategy. In the 2023 Decade Award panel held in Warsaw, the winners presented a retrospective on their award-winning paper. Once again, congratulations to Anthony, Christian, and Bo. There were 3 commentators, Professor Katz Asakawa and Jeremy Clegg, who together co-wrote a commentary, and Professor Cindy Fan. Professor Fan is a professor of geography and vice provost at the University of California, Los Angeles. Her insights from the perspective of a geographer lends useful insights to the study of global cities and contributes to the multidisciplinary perspective that I advocate for the journal. The retrospective and commentaries were written up after the July panel and have just appeared in volume 55, issue 1 of the Journal of International Business Studies, which came out yesterday. I've also written a relatively lengthy intro to the retrospective and commentaries. Together, they are known as the 2023 JIBS Decade Award Collection. The webinar today provides a forum for the authors of the collection to highlight and expand on the ideas contained in this set of papers. I'll now turn over to Anthony.
Right. Right. Thanks very much, Rosalie, and thanks for the opportunity for us to provide a very high-level and brief overview of the retrospective on behalf of Christian, Bo, co-authors. I'd like to run through some of the major ideas that we raised in our retrospective, and to begin, maybe to begin with a little bit of retrospective, but I think perhaps the most of my next comments will be more prospective. We're looking forward to see what's next, or what do we envision for this area of research in the future. So retrospectively, let's see here, there we go. The original idea was one where it was a project that I was involved in, where I was interested in multinationality, in internationalization, and that led me to a series of interviews with senior managers they were then called Interbrew, now they're called InBev. And I recall in my interviews, there was the senior managers repeatedly referred to location in a more micro way than I was anticipating. I had it in mind to talk about countries, whereas their response was, we're not really interested in Canada, we're interested in Toronto. We're not interested in the US, it's more Chicago, Atlanta, Seattle. And that made me realize that I needed to shift my thinking into how to address, or how to accommodate, take on board what it was that they were saying. That led me to the literature on global cities, a very wide, rich, long-standing literature stream that exists in economic geography and in urban studies. And so the first realization that our author team had was the notion of talking to practitioners that often clarifies or sometimes redirects your research question to other aspects that you may well not have reached when looking only at the academic literature. And this required us to read outside of our main discipline. Although the literature stream on global cities has the word global in it, there was really, I would say, a fair bit of resistance early on to the notion that global cities was an IB topic at all. But our breakthrough in our author team was where we figured out how to connect that novel idea, and I would say novel within IB, not novel outside of IB, but how to connect that novel idea to an accepted one. And our breakthrough was when we realized we could connect global city characteristics to the international business conversation on the liability of foreignness. And that was our hook. That's what enabled us essentially to write the paper. And this slide basically highlights the main ideas that underpin the argument in that 2013 paper, the one that won the Decade Award, where we took the ideas that were familiar to IB researchers, the components of the liability of foreignness, uncertainty, discrimination, complexity, and we tied that to the less familiar properties of global cities, of international connectedness, the availability of advanced producer services, and the cosmopolitan environment. And it was this idea that underpinned the paper, so the theoretical argument, and then we also provided an empirical examination of the concept of global cities and the importance to multinational behavior, multinational location strategy and their behavior. Again, this is looking backwards, and what we thought when we were invited to write a piece that reflected on the Decade Award, what we thought was more interesting is to start looking forward to see, well, since the 2013 when we wrote the paper, what has changed? What's different? What is more interesting, or where is this heading? And what it led us to thinking through some of the mega trends that we think are shaping global cities specifically, but the global economy in general. One of those mega trends has to do with people, and that is the shift in demography and social concerns. What we see the world over is that there's an urban migration towards city. There's broadly an urbanization of the planet. And at the same time, there's a rising awareness of social injustices that arise sometimes as a result of that urbanization and economic globalization. And I think that I would imagine there's not a single one of us that isn't aware of the issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, indigenization. Doesn't matter what company you're working for or what country you live in, these are issues that are rising to the surface and need to be addressed. A second megatrend that we identified had to do with places, and in particular, the context that was interesting and important for us had to do with a changing natural environment, diminishing resources, a degrading natural environment. These all point towards the need for sustainable development, a greater sensitivity of the environmental impact of economic activity, and the resulting, I think, demand for the greening of capitalism. The third megatrend that we identified and focused on had to do with things through, in other words, for us, the rise of digital technologies, smart cities, the Internet of Things, basically the improvement of technology, wider applications, the falling cost of using them. And of course, and part of this has to do with the ability to disseminate information more easily, but also disseminate misinformation, which is becoming sort of a rising problem, and something that I think many of us are seeing in the headlines now, where there are what people are calling deep fakes. So what we did in the paper is we took these notions, these various megatrends, and we tried to address the ways in which these megatrends had an impact both on multinational corporations as well as cities. And the interesting parts, we think, are in the intersections between the two. So in other words, how do these megatrends affect cities? How do these cities affect multinationals and vice versa? A great deal of the paper examines those notions and looks at different ways of understanding the impact that these changes, these megatrends, are having on not only on global cities, but on economic globalization more generally. And of course, we believe, being interested in global cities, that cities are a very important context to understand the problems as well as the solutions. There was an interesting quote by the German Chancellor in 2023 who said, "Cities are the place where ideas, concepts, and solutions are made when it comes to tackling humanity's greatest challenges." And one example of this is the clear ascendance of global cities as leaders in climate change, where we see the C40, the group that call themselves C40, which is now actually, perhaps it should be called C100, which is 100 mayors are collaborating with each other, sharing ideas as to how do they become more sustainable? How does city life become more sustainable? So we're looking to cities for solutions. And so this is, I think this notion of context is really important, because as other authors have suggested, that when you change the context of space and place, it yields vastly different realities. What's happening, what's important, these are things that change depending on your unit of analysis. And so in IB, I think that we spend a great deal of time thinking about the elites, the top management teams, the massive organizations that they govern, the skilled technocrats that drive internationalization, multinationality. But there are others that are also within the same equation that are ignored in this. And of course, one is the silent stakeholder of the environment, but also there are many individuals around us, the people who answer the phone, the people who empty the garbage, the people who drive taxis. They're part of the global economy too. And yet we need, I think what we're arguing is that we need to think of ways to include these alternative contexts into IB research. This is very much in line with some of the comments that Rosalie and others have made, that IB needs to inspire action and change, thinking about these other groups that perhaps have been ignored in the past. There's a growing recognition that economic globalization actually is, in some cases, it's the root of grand challenges, or in other cases, it perpetuates it. And so we need, I think, IB research needs to be thinking through how do we go about addressing some of these grand challenges. And what we'd like to suggest is that it often requires an examination of what we called in the paper the little wheels of business, the things that underlie, the things that are in the corners, the things that are not seen, because they are the ones that, in essence, combine to create the big wheels of multinational corporation behavior and performance. What we tried to do then is to create a figure, a way to summarize this notion, and perhaps suggest that this might be one avenue of thinking through what is the future of IB research. So if we examine global issues, global locations, global organizations, there are many other contexts. There are many other global issues, for example, that we could perhaps embrace more fully, of environmental stewardship, social justice, human rights, individual well-being, and as well as issues relating to digitization and AI. And where do these global issues manifest themselves in not only in global cities, although we would argue that is a very important one to consider, but also megacities, sustainable, smart cities, industry clusters. We're not suggesting that this is an exhaustive list. These are examples of different contexts, different global issues, and alternative global organizations beyond MNEs to examine what regulators are doing and non-governmental organizations, public-private partnerships, trade associations, coalitions. In essence, trying to open up the conversation to include other issues, other organizations, other locations that have not really been addressed as fully as they might be in IB. And how do we do that? Well, if we look at our own experience in bringing the global cities concept into IB, we would suggest that the place to start is these other, what we would call inspirational literatures: political economy, urban studies, economic geography. In many cases, these literatures have got oceans of work that has been done on issues that we have understood in IB to be tangential, but then to find that hook, to bring it in, that perhaps that might be our opportunity to derive ways of creating more generative IB research. And that is how we ended our retrospective paper that we were invited by Rosalie to write. So thank you very much for this opportunity to give you a brief overview of our paper.
Thank you very much, Anthony. We'll now turn to Katz.
I'm sorry, that was me. Hi, first of all, I was one of the selection committee members along with Jeremy Clegg, and Jeremy and I were deeply impressed by the novelty of the argument, richness of the argument, and depth and breadth of the argument. And congratulations again. Just a minute. I don't know. Yes, once again, congratulations, Anthony, Christian, and Bo, on such a great work, and we're very happy and honored to do the commentaries. And today, on behalf of our authors team, Jeremy can't make it, but I'm very happy and honored to present this commentary. Well, the work is very great because the paper written published in 2013, it has many novel features. First of all, the work is very pretty much a pioneer in going below the country level to the city level. And this the featuring of the geographic scope was ahead of time when the literature started to focus on the lower level of geographic scopes towards the end of the 2010s, maybe around 2020s. And the paper was already published in 2013, was way ahead of time. And as you see, the citations record and the paper is a high impact research on location decision and global cities. And it highlights the characteristics of global cities that alleviates the liability for this for MNEs. And the paper also highlights the complexities of MNEs location decisions inside or outside global cities. This is particular focus of the paper, which is novel. And obviously, this paper, the work was multi-level work, as well as the interdisciplinary research, which is very strong. But today, rather than going through all the commentaries that we have published, let me just highlight only the several issues that are particularly significant for this purpose, and also develop our argument further. We'd like to call your attentions to the transitions at two levels. One is the transitions at global cities. And the second thing is the transitions at firm level. And the first, let me just elaborate the transition at global cities. The global cities getting more multifaceted and disaggregating, and variant characteristics of global cities cannot be aggregated under a single uniform category. In other words, global cities are not monolithic entities. And therefore, the such tendency of disaggregating may naturally blur the boundaries of the cities, inside and outside, thus making the inside-outside dichotomy less obvious and relevant. If you look at this figure, the global city has been absorbing the characteristics of the adjacent cities concepts, such as digital cities, intelligent cities, and smart cities, etc. And as a result, the characteristics of the global cities are changing radically recently. And the characteristics of the global cities that alleviated the liability foreignness can also be found in other types of cities. Therefore, the boundaries between inside and outside of global city is getting more blurred. So this is one dimensions of change taking place at the global city level that impacts on the MNEs locational decisions. The second level is the transitions at the firm level. So we see the complex motives of firms adopting an ecosystem approach. The firm's locational decision inside or outside a global city is much more nuanced and complex than a simple distinction between supply-driven and demand-driven. And for example, firms with demand-driven factors may also be attracted by locations outside global cities. And firms with supply-driven factors may also be attracted by locations inside the global cities. And the complexities, that led to such a, like intertwined natures is due to the fact that, the firm is localizing in informal partnership-based approaches. The firms localize not only through establishing overseas subsidiaries, but also through the informal and formal partnership, collaboration basis. And we sometimes call it ecosystem approaches. So entry through ecosystem approach makes the firm's location decisions far more complex. If you look at this figure, the firm's motives, well, demand side motives and supply side motives may or may not influence the location decisions outside or inside the global cities. For example, the firms with the demand side motives may choose a location inside global cities, but because of the complex and intertwined motives of the firm's entries, the firms with demand side motives may also choose the location outside of global cities. And similarly, the firms with the supply side motives used to choose the locations outside of global cities. However, because of the complexities and intertwined nature of the firm's motives of localizations, even the firms with the supply side motives may end up choosing the locations inside global cities. So therefore, the firm's motives and the boundaries of the global cities are getting more blurred and intertwined. So that makes the location decisions of the firms even more complex. This is evolving characteristics of the firm's locations as of today. And also, we in our commentaries, we picked sustainabilities as symbolic examples of ecosystem internationalization approach. Actually, Jeremy Clegg has a lot to say about this, and he is not here today. But then without elaborating on this sustainability issues, let me just summarize quickly the gist of the argument that we have developed in our commentaries. Well, MNCs may seek locations on the basis of their sustainability accreditations. Sustainability is integral. It's impossible to ignore as a criteria for location choice. And sustainability is unattainable without the formation of ecosystems for MNCs. In other words, it takes collaborations, partnerships to attain the sustainabilities for MNEs. And therefore, the sustainability goes beyond the straight choice between demand side or supply-driven motives over the location choices. For example, the supply-driven inspiration-seeking sustainability activities may be found in the locations inside cities. So lastly, let me point out some of the new directions for future research, which is a more forward-looking argument. Well, obviously, as authors themselves pointed out, the work needs to be updated and evaluated and recontextualized against the current realities of disruptions. This is already well discussed in the authors' retrospective papers. But, for example, digitalization gives new meanings to the measurement and operationalization of interconnectedness. And geographical tensions and global disruptions likely may have contributed to the bifurcation of global economies along ideological lines and techno-nationalism. So therefore, instead of global cities carrying the characteristic of cosmopolitanism and interconnectedness on global scales, they may have more, the characteristics of the regional connectivities, and as well as the economic in the geographic scope, which is narrower than the global scale. And ecosystem thinking is demanding, which calls for the the same level rich data, because internationalizations through the partnership and collaboration needs to be measured. But we call for the same level of rich and open data to measure such the tendencies. So we really need to have much richer open data to investigate this ecosystem thinking. And lastly, we need more explore a more relevant geographic unit, perhaps in the future. Although as of now, cities, global city may be the most appropriate unit for us to investigate. Maybe in the future, we may be able to find alternative geographic unit to replace geographic global cities. So finally, we need a research on the location decisions for the sustainable activities, such as the green innovation and so forth. Since we only have 10 minutes, I'd like to conclude my presentation here. Again, congratulations, the authors on such a great work, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kat. We'll now turn to Professor Fan. Cindy.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. And my name is Cindy Fan, and I am Professor of Geography, also Vice Provost for International at UCLA. I'd like to start by thanking Rosalie, Editor-in-Chief for the journal JIBS, for the vision for this session, and for really shepherding the entire process that resulted in this collection of papers. And also I'd like to thank Dana for chairing this session, today's webinar. And of course, you know, really wonderful working with the three authors and also the two commentators who've already presented today. And we had a session in Warsaw some months ago, and which was extremely enjoyable. And speaking as a geographer, I think my comments are mostly really regarding how geographers might think about the issues raised, and also because my work has concentrated very much on the East Asia area. So I might also cite some examples from areas that I am most familiar with. So very grateful for this opportunity to be in this group of distinguished scholars. And I think I should do this. Yeah, there you go. All right. So first of all, congratulations to the three authors. I don't know if you actually received a trophy, but if not, then here it is. Here's your trophy. I think Decade Award is a great idea, and especially since 10 years later, we have a chance to kind of learn about any updates and any changes, and kind of, you know, so it gives a forward-looking kind of spin, basically, to something that's already very successful and very highly cited. And so I really think that this idea of Decade Award really should be implemented in more disciplines. Certainly, I haven't seen that being done very frequently or at all in the geography community. And so I think they should maybe start consider doing that. Much has already been said about the impact of the 2013 paper by Anthony, Christian, and Bo, but I'd like to just highlight the fact that this paper is extremely interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. This is really very much a bridging paper, as has been mentioned, especially bridging IB and economic geography, and bridging the literatures on global cities and on multinational enterprise location strategy. But the focus of my presentation today and also my commentary really has to do with the future. So I pick up where I think Anthony left off earlier about sort of the future. And I think they talked about the future being organized into global issues, global organizations, and global locations. And I like to focus on each one of these three futures, if you will. So the first is global issues, and I think Anthony has already talked about some of these issues that are really issues of our times, right? Environmental issues, social justice, human rights, individual well-being, digitalization, etc. But how do we do this? May I draw your attention then to something that happened about 4 years ago in Minneapolis, US, and that is the murder, the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd. We all kind of know that systemic racism has existed, but this event really, I think, has galvanized the energies, not only in the US cities, and I highlight cities here, but also other cities around the world, such as Seoul, Sydney, other places, Cape Town. So it's really the cities where a lot of the issues about inequality, about social injustice, about the environment is really in the cities, right? That the energies have gravitated toward these issues. And I think Anthony mentioned the C40 mayors, and indeed the cities have taken the lead in sort of addressing these issues. And I think that in the corporate world, in IB literature, is really important to therefore think about how to integrate these energies into more traditional questions, such as location strategy. So the second set that Anthony has mentioned, it's global organizations. And here I wanted to also think about this as an attempt to be more inclusive. So quoting from the presentation, from their presentation and paper, retrospective paper, globalization also includes low-level administrators who answer the phone, custodians who empty the garbage, and the caregivers who watch over the kids while their top-flight parents are at work, many of whom are from disadvantaged groups. This is a very rich way of thinking about this because there's so many dimensions. Obviously, you know, the most obvious dimension, it's the people who work. These are the migrants. These are the people who are maybe at lower end of the organization. I'm showing here 2 pictures, one taken from Hong Kong on a Sunday, in which the domestic workers from other countries, mostly from, in this case, this is probably from Indonesia, but then Thailand and the Philippines are among the most popular sources or countries of origin of these domestic workers. And if you go to Singapore, also on a Sunday, I took this picture about a year and a half ago in Lucky Plaza, Singapore, on Orchard Street or Orchard Avenue. You see a lot of, you know, migrants gathering. So we're not only, these examples show that we're not only talking about the laborers, if you will, at the lower end of the organization, but we're also talking about migrants. So another dimension, therefore, that, well, these migrants don't just, you know, come here overnight. They are organizations that recruit them, right? And they are also organizations that care about, so that are set up to think about the benefits and also the welfare of these migrants. So a question can be raised then that these recruitment organizations, or these more like NGOs and socially oriented organizations, to what extent are these organizations also considered global organizations? And how does a multinational enterprise who say work with these migrants also then work with these other global organizations? Yet a third dimension is that because of these migrants, the locals, right, the locals in Hong Kong, the locals in Singapore are able to, you know, work outside the home in a 2-income family, for example. And a lot of times, you know, these employers are able to do that, and they are part of the reason why Hong Kong and Singapore can be sustained and thrive as a global city, global cities. The third way of thinking about this is global locations, and I use the word alternatives to highlight this viewpoint. And both Kat and Anthony have mentioned alternative units of analysis and also alternative contexts of space and place. And it's here that I like to highlight one major finding in the 2013 paper, and that has to do with in and out, which also Kat's talked about. So allow me to just read this quote from the 2013 paper, that the results showed that while demand-driven market seeding and market serving activities such as sales and distribution are more likely to locate in global cities, supply-driven efficiency-seeking and asset-seeking activities such as production and R&D are more likely to be located outside the global city. So that was a major finding in that paper. And geographers, though, when they talk about cities, they do tend to place cities in the regions where they are situated. So Alan Scott, for example, back in 2001, published this book, edited this book called Global City Regions. And about 10 years later, one of his more recent papers on city regions reconsidered, revisit this idea, but also talk about in the last bottom of the slide, city regions are widely distributed across all 5 continents. So not just, in certain parts of the world. And also he draw attention to Shanghai, Pearl River Delta as multi-clustered agglomerations. Zooming into 2 tables from his paper here, I just want to highlight here on the top table, the last column, between 1990 to 2015, cities that have more than 10 million people have grown the fastest among all the other cities. So cities are certainly growing faster and bigger. And the bottom table shows that Asia and Africa now really account for very large proportions of urban population in the world. And another geographer, John Agnew, then talked about place, right? And also draw attention to historically constituted social context, which Anthony mentioned, because this is where people actually live their lives. This is how a place becomes a place. A more recent publication by Pablo Baisotti, again, highlight cities in Latin America. And when Kat said that the features of global cities are evolving, this is indeed the case in Asia and Latin America, where some of these global cities may or may not be characterized along the same dimensions that have been used to character or to define global cities of the past, so to speak. Another more recent publication by Wei-Peng Wu in Qingdao talks about the concept of provincialization, and they define provincialization as to decenter perspectives that have allowed theories situated in the context of a particular world region, in this case, Europe, North America, to be seen as universal. And I think one of the attendees asked a question about smart city. I'm not qualified to actually answer that question, but I just wanted to mention that in this particular book, there's one chapter on smart urbanism. And this chapter highlights Chinese cities actually as potentially leading the role for other cities that aspire to become smart cities. And if any of you has visited China recently, you notice that sometimes nobody carries cash. Everybody basically just carries a phone. The train ticket is there, money is there, their ID is there, right? So is this something to aspire to? I don't know, but certainly some of the major Chinese cities are indeed pretty smart in terms of technology. I wanted to just close by highlighting two other topics. One is how the pandemic has impacted global cities. San Francisco's downtown, it's quite empty right now because people are working from home. So does this trend affect what we know as global cities, as places where people gather, as places where cosmopolitan activities takes place. Another sort of topic that I like to mention is very central in a sense to the 2013 paper, and that is liability of foreigners. But I kind of use a different kind of perspective. One is raise a question: how does AI overcome foreigners? Do we have to actually be in a foreign area in order to be able to overcome liability of foreigners? If AI can provide a lot of information through, big data and so on. Another way of thinking about it is when we mention foreigners, does it have to be actually foreign, right? So here, this is a little bit of a sort of, coming, I guess, is there like this expression coming from a left view? This is really probably very not usually mentioned in the IB literature, maybe. This article from South China Morning Post cited a survey that over a third of Chinese origin scientists in the US do not feel welcome in the country, and close to 3/4 do not feel safe as academic researchers. Certainly this has to do with geopolitical climate, especially US-China relations. And anti-Asian racism in the US is still very alive. In the year 2020 and 2021, roughly 5,000 incidents, anti-Asian incidents have been reported, and many more have not been reported. Some of the students at UCLA actually came up with this article that showed that among some of the incidents, the victims were actually, some of them were not Chinese at all. We've got Vietnamese, we've got Thai, we've got the Filipinos being victimized, injured and robbed, etc., etc. So all Asians are kind of lumped together. So the question is, do Asian Americans have to deal with liability of foreigners without even going abroad? And finally, a bit of good news is that it seems that the anti-Asian incidents have dropped in recent months. But the question is, what is behind this drop? And the quote here from this researcher is that we don't have a precedent saying that the Chinese flu has come to the United States. Well, if that is the reason, what are we looking at after November this year when the presidential election is taking place again? So the question to, I think, IB researchers and international business is, with all these, social, with all these issues that are really affecting the everyday life of workers, of entrepreneurs, of investors, and so on, what should be the strategies to address these issues while at the same time keep the business alive? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy. I'll now turn the webinar back to Dana.
Right, thank you very much to everybody. Exciting collection of papers. And once again, I invite all the participants to post questions and comments in Q&A. We can also use the chat. Well, let me invite everyone back in terms of speakers. I have several questions in here that I think we should address as a panel. And let's start with definitions. In the chat, as well as in Q&A, there is a question around smart cities that Nina posted. I think it actually, Kaz, was one of those things that you mentioned on one of the slides. You actually showed the, quite a large territory of different kinds of cities. So global cities, smart cities. Let's provide some conceptual clarity. I don't know whether, Kaz, do you want to start, and then we go to perhaps one of the authors?
Yes, perhaps I would say that the discussion belongs to the field of economic geographies as well. And then probably the Cindy may have a lot more to say about this. But we look at the disaggregation pattern of global cities we observe, and as well as the recent literature in IB observes the trends to absorb the diverse characteristics of the city, right? Beyond the standard definitions. That includes like technological dimensions as represented by digitalizations. And some authors use the term digital cities, and the city, which is characterized by the very active engagement at the policy level and the firm business level in developing, nurturing, and leveraging the digitalizations. The very similar thing, the smart city. Smart city implies the concept in which the city as a whole has very active engagement in developing and advancing and leveraging the digital infrastructures fostered by the policy level and the firm level. Some smart city is driven by the policy level endeavors, and some smart cities are driven by the firm level. So and the same is true for the social aspect and then sustainable aspect. So I and Jeremy use these diverse characteristics of the cities as illustrations to show that the global city, by definition, is much more fragmented and carries the multifaceted nature of the characters. Yeah.
Thank you, Cass. Turning to Christian, your take on that, please.
Yeah. Sorry, thanks. There's also something we talk about in the retrospective paper. In a way, you could say that I think it's a great question, first of all, and I think that in a way these are different things because they're defined by different characteristics, right? Global cities are defined by global connectedness. Smart cities are defined by the use of technology, and sustainable cities are defined by some environmental outcomes. So in that sense, those definitions are not related. So you could say they're different concepts, but on the other hand, there's clearly a lot of overlap in the sense that many smart cities also strive to become more sustainable. They strive to become smarter and so on. But we have looked at many of these rankings, and we can see that even though there's a correlation, there's also some variation. So some cities might be very high on the global cities ranking, but not so high on the smart and sustainable cities, and vice versa. So I think Oslo would be an example of a city that would be very high on maybe smartness and sustainability, but much lower on the global city ranking, and so on. So it's interesting how these things sort of develop. And the question is also what is most important for multinational companies. Maybe the global connectivity is most important for the companies themselves, whereas the employees, the highly educated labor forces that work for the MNEs, for them, they may care more about things like sustainability, smartness, social inclusion, and those types of things. So.
All right, thank you very much. Right, so a question, I guess, Anthony, to you. You talked about, when you talked about the original paper as well as retrospective, you mentioned that you managed to, and I quote, tie novel idea to an accepted one. So you talked about something which is very familiar to IB researchers and how that was, I guess, novel or innovative to tie that familiar to less familiar. So right now, say, 10 years after the paper, and also one day after your retrospectives published, the commentaries came out as well. What is a novel idea and what is an accepted one?
Yeah, well, in the context that I was referring to it earlier, the notion of novel is novel to us. It's like new to you, right? Or new to me. That's novel. But the point that I was trying to make is that many of these ideas actually aren't new. There's this notion of there's nothing new under the sun. And in fact, with many of the questions, the issues that we grapple with, what I think we can often find is that there is a rich literature somewhere else where they've been looking at that context very deeply for many years. And the challenge for us, however, is that in many cases, the labels aren't the same. The research isn't structured in the same way. And in fact, we often don't even interact with those communities. Economic geography is one that is, I would say, recently has become more drawn into the IB tent. But I would say that is more a recent phenomenon. And in fact, I recall when, early on, when we were working on the Global Cities paper, one of the common references, the common, let's say, responses was interesting idea, but it's not IB. And so we had to find to be able to tie the notion of global cities, which we thought was really important, to something in other words, to tether it or anchor it to something where people would say, that's IB. How does your novel idea, your sort of, let's say, non-traditionally IB idea, how does that connect to something that we know something about? And so that was the notion of novelty. And I think there's huge opportunities for us as IB scholars to mine other areas of other research streams to see how have they looked at issues and questions that we looked at only tangentially, or it's sometimes issues in the background, when it comes to it. Like one example is with international development. There's a great deal of concern about the ways and means by which global value chains are governed. And oftentimes the focus is in areas where some of the institutions are weak. We don't really have a literature in IB that speaks to that, but there certainly is a research stream that does. And so my sense is to take those novel ideas and to embed them into the IB research by tethering or tying them.
Thank you. So, and actually, I'd like Chief Editor-in-Chief Rosalie Tung to comment on that from the JIBS perspective in a minute. But before I go to Rosalie, Cindy, I wanted to bring you in here. Anthony's kind of nodded your way. So, and I guess I want to twist a question for you. So, when you looked at IB, what novelty have you seen in things that we are doing using the foreign glasses, if we put it this way?
Well, that's not a very easy question to answer, because I am among all the IB experts. But I wanted to maybe, before answering your question, kind of, comment a little bit on what Anthony said about the IB field. I think this is not unique, the fact that, scholars in a certain field are constantly really thinking about, this is very interesting research, this is a very interesting research question, but is it this, right? Is it is it the research questions that I should be asking for this field? Because I think disciplinary fields are, in a sense, maybe by definition, siloed to a certain extent. And so there's a certain line drawn between, this field and that field. And so that makes, however, interdisciplinary work pretty difficult, sometimes challenging, because you will have to persuade the reviewers of a journal, right? Why is it that this paper belongs to this journal? So I think that this dilemma does exist everywhere. Of course, includes geography. Oftentimes, my colleagues and I would raise this question: is this really geography, right? If it's not, then why are we publishing this? Back to Dana's question, I think it's very novel for geographers to be more familiar with IB research. I think geographers tend to come maybe at a similar question, but just from a different angle altogether, right? We think about the space, we think about place. Sometimes we do think about, investors, we do think about the actors and the agency, and if you can really do it right, then you both the structure, the agency would be considered altogether, but that is also a challenging thing to do. So I think that the novelty may be actually to develop what's at the juncture and also collaborate across disciplines in order to really, I think, excite both disciplines.
Thank you very much. Bo, I think you wanted to comment on this very briefly before I move on.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe this is a segue back to Rosalie. And just thank you very much, Cindy, for your comments. Thank you to everyone for your comments. But one thing you said that really resonated with me was this idea of flipping the idea of liability of foreigners and thinking about, you're talking about people who live in the US themselves influenced or feeling this kind of liability of foreigners. And I'm thinking about this in the context of what Anthony was talking about. Instead of thinking about liability of newness when you go to a new literature, there's also the upside to this endeavor, right? And that is, as an outsider of a field, when we as IB scholars read into new literature, such as economic geography, political science, or sociology literature, there might be actually an opportunity here for us to look at it through a different lens. And I think this is where the value really comes to bear when you have the opportunity to step into a new field as a relative outsider, look at it with a sort of different view, different lens of background, different theories, and then bring it back into your own literature. And I'm wondering if this is something JIBS is going to sort of perpetuate even more in the future, this idea of cross-disciplinary research where we really go out, maybe consciously look for other areas that we can contribute to and from.
Right, Rosalie, that's to you.
Yeah, I agree, with what was being said by Anthony, Cindy, and Bo, and I think this really underscores what I have been trying to encourage very much within JIBS itself, which is going to the multidisciplinary approach, because I think if we look at the field of IB, and since I, perhaps I'm the oldest in this group, when AIB first started, the founding fathers came from different backgrounds. Okay, they came from economics, they came from sociology, anthropology, but over the years the field has narrowed. So I keep coming back to this fable of the six blind men that are trying to describe what an elephant is, because each of us are just looking at it from the perspective of our own little discipline. And while we know a lot about that particular discipline itself, but we really do not, we're missing the total picture itself. So I'm really trying to encourage through the, bringing in of people from other disciplines, and also encouraging ourselves as the IB scholars to really look outside of our field to see, what can be brought into the field itself. As Anthony said, nothing is really novel to the extent that, that somewhere it must exist in some other discipline itself. It might be different terminologies that are being used, but I think it's through these insights that we can really bring about the kind of paradigm shift that I, wrote in the editorial on disruptive knowledge itself. I think consolidating knowledge obviously is wonderful. Okay, it's added and contributed a lot to the field itself. But I think what we're really missing is some kind of disruptive knowledge itself. And I think disruptive knowledge, one of the ways of encouraging it really would be to bring in people from different disciplines with multiple lenses to look at, the issues that we have been confronted with.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next question, and that's a combination of several questions, also Arash's comment in the chat. So Kaz talked about the need for a more relevant geographic unit other than quote-unquote global cities to capture today's evolving dynamic environments. And in your retrospectives, I think there was a formulation, complexities of intertwined nature. So I guess the question that I'm trying to compose in here from different questions, how do we capture that complexity? At what unit of analysis should we be looking for, a key to unlock that complexity? Through which theoretical lenses, perhaps multiple combination, can we at all see the complexity? Because one thing we shouldn't do, and I guess we all agree, we shouldn't simplify that complexity, right? That also building on what Rosalie said right now, that disruption comes from the embracing and understanding that complexity. So let's reflect a little bit on that. And perhaps to the complexity, let's also add the paradoxes that all three speakers actually pointed out, directly or indirectly, paradoxes of global cities that create multinationals and attract multinationals, solve inequalities and contribute to inequalities. So there are lots of kind of dilemmas and paradoxes that the context of global city entails. So complexity, paradoxes, dilemmas. Where do we start? Let me go to you, Cass.
Okay, right. So just to briefly address the first questions that came to me. Well, obviously, the reason I brought up this alternative scope of geography is that to see that maybe in the future, maybe 10 years later, 20 years later, maybe there may be alternative scope that we could probably use it. But currently the more dominant scope is maybe the geographic scale, which is the like global, regional, local, which is dominant scale, and also the scope is like a nation state, cities and counties, and these are more administrative levels, unit, and also the political dimensions are red state and blue state and that kind of things, and ethnic regions and like religious areas and cultural areas and a lot of diversities in dimensions. And what we're trying to bring into the picture is that we'd like to look at the ecosystem-based locations beyond, in a way, geographies. Geography is a physical unit, right? What we're suggesting is that even the global cities is certain locations on the globe. And maybe, although the authors themselves alluded to that, and then they did it in the subsequent studies themselves, but we're saying that maybe ecosystem may capture the virtual units that transcends the individual geographical locations. So multiple global cities or sometimes villages or the small towns can compose the certain virtual units that compose the so-called ecosystem. That might be more appropriate, fluid and dynamic unit of analysis that may provide the advantages of the multinational companies to overcome so-called liability of foreign assets under certain circumstances. That's the kind of argument we're trying to develop.
See, so it's a location-free interdependence.
Yeah, exactly. More virtual fluid ones.
So Bo, let me go to you. Could you add, something in here to that perspective, perhaps specifically thinking about unit of analysis and knowing you also perhaps methods?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting from all of the comments I hear here, everyone seems to be talking about, if in Rosalie's words, different parts of the elephant, right? And I think there is much more than 6 parts to this elephant. It probably has hundreds, if not thousands of parts. And this raises the question, of course, of if something is so complex, and we have different ways of thinking about complexity, of course, but it's clearly multidimensional, it's clearly multi-level, it's clearly multidisciplinary. We have bridging of ideas, we have ecosystems, we have individual level, we have firms, we have subsidiaries within multinational firms, we have regions, we have city states, we have city regions now, we have countries and so forth. So what to do about it? And I think all of these things are important to keep in mind. I think where I'm actually a little bit disagreeing with Rosalie in the sense that we have to look at the total picture. It would be very nice if you could look at the total picture, but reality is JIBS, the way that is organized now, IB, the way it's organized now, is very much still based on single types of pieces in the journal, i.e. one article of, let's say, a maximum of 40 pages. So in a paper of 40 pages, is it likely, is it feasible that you're going to be able to capture this entire picture of complexity? The answer is, of course, no. Of course, there are ways we can do this, but it may take a little bit of a shift in the focus of what we do. And I think, Rosalie, you are already alluding to it by saying we need to bring in scholars from different disciplines and so forth. Maybe special issues is one way of going. But I'd like to propose something else. I like to think more about it as a programmatic research. In other words, instead of us thinking so much about getting that one next paper published, we should start encouraging authors to think more long-term in terms of creating programs for capturing various parts of this complexity or the whole picture. But the whole picture will still be a mosaic of putting together multiple papers in an area. So if we want to capture, for instance, how ecosystems are evolving and changing and so forth, there's lots of issues around that. And this question itself has multiple implications for theory, for lenses, for data, and so forth. So I don't think there's one paper that's going to be able to capture this complexity. I think the appropriate lens might be something like systems theory, the idea of thinking about how we can capture these complexities. But again, we will have to disaggregate it into various streams of papers, maybe, that together can piece together what's going on. In terms of unit of analysis and methods, I think we've seen perhaps an increase lately, very lately, in plurality of methods, but it's still very much the old-fashioned standard types of methodologies and techniques that are being used in IB. That is both in qualitative and quantitative research. We see very little new innovative methods coming up. We actually still see very little mixed methods being applied. But for questions related to these kinds of complex issues of multinationals, global cities, individuals within global cities, ecosystems, regions, and so forth, I think we need to encourage much more mixed methods. But again, from a programmatic research perspective, I don't think any data sets, and I know Cass and others have talked about this in your piece, how do we develop and create new data sets that can capture, for instance, ecosystems? But ecosystems themselves are very complex, and they're just part of the picture. One of the things that we also talk about in the retrospective piece is the idea that there is co-evolution, the idea that cities themselves develop as a function of multinational firms. So it's not that multinational firms just ex ante or ex post just select a particular location, but they actually might help develop how a city evolves over time. And so this symbiotic relationships between cities and MNEs or ecosystems and individuals within them is something that's very hard to capture. It's not impossible to capture. I think it just may take a bit of methodological innovation and a bit of programmatic long-term research streams and thinking in our literature. And I'll stop there.
Excellent. And I'm sure that's exactly the kind of research that JIBS would like to welcome as submissions. Right, I'm moving to the next question. And again, it's going to be a combination of several. And I think I'll start with you, Cindy, because you actually offered a visual for this towards the end of your presentation. Stephanie posted a question around how have recent geopolitical shifts and global events such as pandemic and others affected the functioning of global cities. And to this, I'm going to add a little bit more in the sense that global cities, to a certain extent, you know, they're hard with any kind of external shocks. Global cities, because of the characteristics that you identified, they are perhaps hardest hit, right? So in a sense, like your picture, Cindy, that you used in your presentation, it's a San Francisco without without people, right? So London in the middle of pandemic, if you've all seen Venice during COVID-19, you know, like empty cities, empty squares, empty apartments. So are we wise in this regard? Are we wise enough to actually focus on global cities? Because we're always going to see the extreme of any kind of shocks and impacts. Cindy, let me go to you. So I guess I'm moving discussion in the dark sides of the global cities, in the shadows of global cities.
Let me see if I can take it to a more optimistic angle. So Stephanie, I think you raised a very good question, the role of global cities. I would probably broaden your question to the role of cities in general, because I think these these challenges are affecting everywhere, but in particular in places where the majority of the population or significant number of people reside. So I think cities definitely need to take on the leadership role. As I mentioned earlier, I think some of the mayors are indeed trying to attack these problems by forming coalitions. And so this is not just about climate change or COVID-19 or geopolitical conflicts, but I think that country level, at the country level, sometimes things don't really move as fast. And if ever, I think that the subnational level is one where things actually do happen. And so I think so between the city and between the country and the city, there could be like states and provinces, but I really do think that cities have a significant role to play there to address these issues. To Dana's question about what happens to global cities now that we have the pandemic and Zoom and people, virtual. Your question actually it gives me an opportunity to comment on I think Cass's comment, as well as one of the comments in the chat about geography being physical. I think that is a very sort of tempting way to think about geography, but what is a city, right? A city it's a place, yes, but a city essentially consists of people. The reason a city is because there's production, there's consumption, there's also innovation, right? And basically it's people who consume, people who produce, and people who innovate. So I would say that even if you're not going to work in downtown San Francisco, if what you're doing, no matter where you are, does contribute to consumption, production, and innovation, then the city still exists, okay? Now, I'm not saying that if everybody leaves San Francisco, that will be a completely different kind of scenario. But if we're only talking about downtown San Francisco, right? People are not going to the physical building to work, but they might be in Daly City, they might be in Oakland, they might be in places where they live, but they are still contributing to the functions of a city. If that's the case, then I think essentially cities still exist. That said, I think the phenomenon now is challenging one major sort of tenets of economic geography, and that is agglomeration. Okay, we consider agglomeration a reason for cities to exist. People go to the same place to buy things. You go to a coffee shop, and while you're sitting down, with friends in a coffee shop, new ideas emerge. Now, this may be taken away because you're not doing face-to-face. So I think we're at a juncture where we are, in not so much dark territory, Dana, but uncharted territory.
Excellent. And actually brings me to one point that I want to also mention when, Anthony, you were talking about future of AIB research and mapping potential theoretical you could say discipline, theoretical framework that could be helpful, urban studies, political economy, economic geography. I pointed out, and here city sociology is a branch of the sociologies that explores the social structures, institutions, relationships, and dynamics that shape and are shaped by urban spaces, they actually deal with the issue of or with the question of agglomeration from a sociological perspective. So here's another opportunity for to bring the interdisciplinary research. All right, I saw Christian waving at me, and I'll pass now to you, but I also would like you then to kind of move us towards the end, perhaps a couple of final notes in addition to the, I presume that's a comment to what we've been talking about. So just put the hat of the Decade Award winner as well when you do your comment.
Okay. I'm not sure about the final award or the final comments, but I just wanted to follow up on the face-to-face, which I think is very interesting, because you could think that, and it's something we also talk about in the retrospective paper, whether the digital interaction and communication is sort of a substitute for face-to-face, where we argue maybe it's more of a complement, in the sense that you know, people can maybe live in the suburbs and then they come into work occasionally to create new social connections, and then they communicate digitally afterwards, right? So I think there's a good complementarity between the two that might change the geography of how companies and their employees agglomerate in the cities. Yeah, so that was just a brief comment to that. I don't know about sort of closing remarks. Maybe Anthony do you have some closing remarks?
I like how we just throw the ball here, right? Anthony.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to respond to the point that was made about the potential or imminent death of global cities. I think it's greatly over-exaggerated. My sense is that I think that global cities really took it on the chin with COVID-19. In fact, I think the conduit of COVID-19 into some places was through global cities. So they're kind of implicated in the colossal spread of that virus. and given that connectivity and a cosmopolitan milieu are all things that are at the core, are the reason for being for global cities, COVID attacked those directly. And so we saw, I think, a disproportionate decline in the activity within global cities as a result of COVID-19. I think at the same time, what we're seeing now, and we will see, I think, I would predict into the future, we're seeing a dramatic rise, sort of from the ashes type thing, where some of these cities that we're identifying as being really hard hit, I think that we're going to see that they are going to come back in spades and take on the dominant, the leadership role that they had, and I think will regain on many important issues, whether it relates to social, environmental. I think that we can look to global cities as to where those ideas will be born and where they'll be developed and ultimately implemented.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think I will be unfair not to give the third author of a decade-winning award a final word.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. I just want to thank everyone here, particularly the committee that gave us they awarded us this award, and also, of course, Rosalie and JIBS and all the commentators on this piece. Look, I think cities are here to stay. Cities are going to be extraordinarily important for the future. Cities in many various different types of ways we can characterize them. And I'm really happy to see how our paper and the retrospective paper and hopefully the commentaries will now spur a new sort of or renewed maybe focus on city as level of unit of analysis for IB. I think there are many other units of analysis that one could look at within IB, but certainly cities are here to stay, and cities is something that we should consider in the future. So I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity for us to present our work, and hopefully this moves a new agenda forward.
Excellent. Right, so that basically gives me an opportunity to thank all our panelists for insightful discussion, and perhaps add that this was my very last JIBS tip webinar in my capacity as a host. I'm passing the torch to Stephanie Wang, who is also here on the call from the Indiana University. It's been my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to more and new insights that Stephanie and Klaus are going to be bringing to all of you, to the whole AIB community and beyond in the nearest future. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Well, thank you very much, Dana, for all your hard work. Okay, and thank you all of you for this wonderful webinar. I certainly hope our participants enjoyed it as much as we did.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.